Okay, everything looks good there.
These identical twins are very profoundly deaf. So they are
Oh, I know what we'll do.
at the extreme end of profound deafness.
Is that right? Okay, so like in the W chart here, I got confused. The one on the right's the J, the one on the left's the W. So the W is 5 minutes older than J, right? Yeah.
J is far more difficult to understand, and his communication is quite a bit more, like W can communicate extremely better than J. And I've often thought that it should be the other way around.
What are the birth chart constants for deafness?
The moon severely afflicted by Saturn.
Right.
If Saturn is prominent and severely afflicted, a severely afflicted moon may cause trouble with the hearing. Even a powerful or harmonious aspect, of course, such as the trine, but it's between the moon and Saturn by veins.
Right,
Stellar healing.
and I don't know of. Does anybody else out there know of other configurations they've read for deafness? I distinctly remember the Saturn Moon thing, but that's from Zane. I don't remember reading anything different anywhere else. But that doesn't mean that there isn't something. Certainly, they've got this prominent Saturn that's opposition to MC. I don't know. The big thing really is the square, the close square of the Sun and Saturn. That's sort of the aspect that stands out. That's
Yes, that's
see that the Sun is applying to almost a perfect square there with Saturn. So, which of course also makes a T-square because it's also square of the MC to the Sun. And the Moon, does not seem to be severely afflicted. It's certainly not, if I sort this on harmony, there's worse planets than the Moon, that's for sure.
the moon, square the ascendant, and
Yeah.
opposition Jupiter and Uranus. W has been quite successful academically and went to pharmacology college, and at the same time his brother, 5 minutes apart, identical, got diagnosed with schizophrenia and had to go on medication. And then also recently, Jay, at a young age in the early 20s, developed prostate cancer at the same time, identical twin brother. He now has just finally landed a job after a long wait in cancer research with his pharmacology education.
So
it's always been quite fascinating, and I've heard many things like that amongst twins. W did not develop the prostate cancer, and he is not diagnosed with schizophrenia,
but J is.
Jay, yes.
Wow. Well, that's really interesting. Of course, Saturn with J is at that angle there.
Well, they're both on the IC.
They're both there, but it's just that Saturn here in the J chart is moves into a full open window for power, whereas as soon as it crosses over to here, then it's weaker.
Yeah, but that's closer to an exact conjunction with the IC too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but anyway, well, I think just to sum this up, I certainly haven't done any research on twins, but it would be fascinating to see what kinds of things are different in their charts that happen. Like, for example, this is a great example of, where they have, radically different fortunes in terms of health, mental and physical health. And why is that? And I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. But it would be interesting to study those things. Okay, well,
Albert,
go ahead, Michael.
I was just going to say, Albert Benjamin in the 40s did a lot of research on twins, didn't he? Some of that work is published in 30 years research by Doris Chesco in that book. You might find that very interesting.
Thank you. I have that book. I will. Thank you,
You
Michael.
will see some work on twins in there, and there's also some other publications where the research on twins were done, and it is a very, very fascinating study, I have to say. The thing about what Albert Benjamin was saying was that the astrological influence is only one factor. We live in two environments, of course, and the physical plane is another environment we should rule out, and the conditioning process of the physical plane, where one twin will be subject to certain conditioning processes.
That's
It's a very, very fascinating.
Is that when the
thing.
twins are separated?
that's a very important point, Michael, because what happens is that the conditioning after birth can nudge the two in slightly different directions, and that very slight difference builds up over time. It's like a very small angle, and when you go out far enough, it gets to be a very wide orb. I think that's an important thing to note. I'd forgotten about the twin studies in 30 years research, but as Laura pointed out, another really interesting thing is to go look at twins that are separated at birth, that grow up separately, and to see the events that happen in their life. Now, I have read some about that, and that's fascinating. So it's really sort of two different studies. With twins that grow up apart from each other, it's sort of more interesting to study how their commonalities. And for ones that grow up together, it's interesting to study how they grow apart, in what ways they become differentiated, shall we say.
Mm-hmm. This is Alice Murray. I have a question.
Go ahead.
Paul, did you do the astrodynes for both charts?
No, I didn't do them for both charts.
Their Saturn is the predominant.
Yes. Good point, Alice Marie. That, they're definitely a difference in their astrodynes there. Whereas if we go over here,
That's that point you were making before about Saturn being angular in Jay's chart.
right, then it
Makes
makes
that
a difference.
difference.
It does make a difference. It's over here. It's Mars, Moon, and then Saturn. And over here, it's Saturn, Mars, Moon. Well, I don't know quite what to make of that, but
Look how disharmonious it is.
yeah, that compared to this, let's see, that's 65. That's a minus 65. That's a, yeah. Well, it's definitely, Jay has the more discordant chart. Yeah. That's for sure.
Some physical environmental factors that I've always had in the back of my mind with the medical scene at their birth and during the mother's pregnancy. She was a bit older, expecting twins, and ultrasound had come out. The birth began as a natural birth, and Jay being the firstborn, they put a needle in his skull to, monitor and test him, and he showed signs of distress. So the cesarean was performed, and also I think putting a needle in the unborn I would think the signs of distress would be there as soon as you put the needle. Anyway, that's
Yeah.
Yeah, that's,
Yeah.
there's some environmental things I always.
Good.
Having worked in labor and delivery as a nurse for many years, anytime you have a birth where it starts out natural and winds up being, becomes a C-section, you always have to wonder about oxygen issues, where one twin was better oxygenated than the other one. And I kind of wondered about that immediately about that, with one being diagnosed as schizophrenic later on. What went on in the delivery room is probably pretty critical here, especially given that it started out to be a natural birth and then they had to do a C-section.
okay. Are we ready to move on? We'll look at the chart quickly and we'll look at the aspects here and just
Okay.
see, we'll just do a quick thing here.
He passed on July 10th, 2013, if you want to do major progressions, Paul.
Okay,
He inherited retina eye cancer that goes to your brain, and his father had it. And his father was the first surviving generation, but lost his eye and had a glass eye. They took the risk of having a child and knew they had to look. You can actually look in the eye and see the signs of the cancer, which they did in JM. And he had very successful treatments for it, did not lose his eye, was a healthy, vibrant, amazing young person. And at puberty, the cancer returned, which was the real shock to the medical world as well as the loved ones. The tumor appeared on the pineal gland at puberty. So he moved on in 2013.
and he was only 15 at that time?
That's right. Saturn, Jupiter, the Moon, and Neptune are the planets being gifts for Cancer. And his Saturn is square Neptune. His Saturn is opposition his MC. Jupiter is square his ascendant. The Moon is square Saturn and mutually receptive. And Neptune is square the MC. So all those planets, and in the harmony and discord, those are all the high powered and discordant planets.
Right, and this Saturn down in the third house here, the Moon is applying to a conjunct of Neptune, and then that conjunction is square Saturn there. Yeah, so Jupiter. Yeah.
For the eye trouble, looking for something between the Moon and Mars, it's only a sesqui square. But
14. Yeah. Yeah, it's a sesqui square.
Do you give the wide orb of the moon with an aspect like that?
Yeah, well, it's
Angular house.
it'd be 13. It's only a degree or so off of being sesqui square. It's pretty close.
Oh, I see.
Plus, it's the Moon in an angular house, so it's
And
It's fairly
Neptune's
powerful
involved
aspect.
in that angle, in that aspect as well, isn't it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I would say so. So, well, that's interesting.
and
Well, now,
and
go ahead.
the trouble really came back when Mars, by major progression, got right between the Sun and Mercury in the sixth house there. That's when the healthy, happy boy at puberty
Right.
started getting headaches.
Yeah,
Those
that's
are
very
really good
interesting.
examples.
The main thing we don't want to forget that, if somebody's born with these particular aspects, it shows a predisposition, but it doesn't mean they're going to get it, right? There's a lot of
Absolutely.
there's a lot of things.
Absolutely, and even in this case, it was a very hereditary cancer.
Right.
I did progress his chart when he went, and Mars just is right there by major progression between the Sun and Mercury.
Uh-huh. And how
At
long
the
did he
time.
have, do you have any idea how long it was between the diagnosis of the recurrence in adolescence and his death?
Fall, winter of 2010, and he went in the summer of 2013.
So almost 3 years.
Well, okay, but you can see how the Sun has just moved
Yeah.
into the 7th house. So it's gone angular and directly opposition the ascendant, right? And it gets the diagnosis. I've got it done here for October 17, 2010.
That would have been an active trigger right there. The
Yeah,
sun.
that's pretty heavy aspect right there when you're already, when you got these hereditary predispositions and natal astrological predispositions. Okay, well, hey, that's pretty interesting. Very, very interesting. Right, thank you. Okay, let's
And
move
Mars is on his sun. Did you notice that?
on. No, darn it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
major Mars progress conjunction.
Progress
Sun.
Mars conjunct
Well-
natal sun. Right conjunct it.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So as Mars moved over on top of the Sun. Well, there you go. Proves astrology. Okay, so are we ready to move on to the next phase here, away from the medical stuff, which
Yeah.
is really fascinating. But let's see, Michael, you sent a chart. Let's bring that chart up here. Naomi Mitchison chart.
Yeah.
Tell us about, now everybody,
It's basically, I've got my own bit of software, but I just created this PDF file. I didn't know how it was going to look on your screen, but
Purdy.
I thought it would just help a little bit. I don't know if it does, but it's definitely more, isn't it?
Why did you choose her, Michael?
Well, for one reason, in this country, we don't record times on birth certificates, but fortunately in Scotland they do. So that's certainly one. And Naomi Mitchison seemed to be an interesting person to me, She lived to 101 years old. Interesting, she's got the Sun conjunction Mars.
let me put this down.
She was a prolific writer of novels. She had a very obviously long life. She was involved in politics and all kinds of things like that. And the particular area that was of interest here was friends, partnerships, love, that kind of thing. And well, this particular one, she certainly had an interesting life in that regard.
Multiple partners, you mean?
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah, multiple. She married. No, well, I've got the details in front of me, so I can find it. She married in 1916 Gilbert Richardson, and she had 7 children.
Wow.
But they had a kind of open marriage, so that they both had relationships outside of the marriage. So it was pretty unusual, especially for the time, 1916 and all the rest of it. So she had Uranus in the 7th house, the Sun, which is ruler of the 5th house in Scorpio, conjunction Mars, which is actually the first decanate. The Sun is actually in the first decanate of Scorpio, of Eucus. I believe that's
Right. The sex decadent.
involved in the sex drive.
Right. The sex decadent of the sex sign.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the Sun, Mars conjunction are both squaring the Moon. And obviously the Sun is the ruler of the cusp of the 5th there. So I thought it was quite an interesting chart. Now the one that, when it comes to friends, if you look at the moon in Aquarius, she had a very large circle of radical left-wing intellectual type friends, including J.R.R. Tolkien. Well, maybe they certainly were looking at things very differently than the vast majority of people at that particular time.
Yeah, it was the Roaring 20s.
Yeah, you're right. That's true. And so she had a very large circle of friends, so that was quite interesting. And also she was very much into socialism. She was a pioneer of feminism, advocating women's rights. She was advocating birth control. But she was a prolific writer, and if you look at the dominant planet in this chart is the moon, and that rules the third house. It has a massive aspect to Mercury, the Sun, Mars, Jupiter, and Pluto in the first house. And so it's a very oh yes, the other thing, she actually had a degree studying science at Oxford University, but in World War I she left all that and she went off to become a volunteer nurse on the during World War I, on the front line. I don't think they allowed them to go on the front line actually, but she was certainly there. And the constants for, in the Brothers of Light's research, constants for a nurse is a dominant moon, a 6th house that's dominant, 12th house as well. I'm not sure if that figures too strongly. But,
Well, she certainly has a dominant moon, does she not?
In a full 6th house of service.
In a full 6th house, which would be exactly what Laura said.
I believe Pluto as well. Pluto as well figures in the nursing career as well. So, but I just out of interest, she was involved in as a volunteer nurse, so that I thought was quite significant in terms of the chart's potential. But the really interesting one, I guess, is the Uranus in the 7th house. And the kind of lifestyle that she sort of lived.
Right, yeah. Well, let's just review real quick. I made some notes here that I thought we'd just review real quick, and then we'll look back at this chart. With regard, we'll just talk about marriage and partnership in general, and then we can look at more specific things. But I think everybody knows that the main house you look at, of course, is the 7th house. And you look to the ruler of the 2nd house. And you look to the aspects that the ruler makes to other planets in the chart and what houses those are in. For example, if there's an aspect between the 7th house and the 2nd house, then money will have some influence over the marriage. And depending upon which planet is more powerful, the 7th house planet or the 2nd house planet, will depend on his marriage, the primary factor in fortune with money, or is money the driving factor in what happens in the marriage. So, and Zane also points out that Neptune or Uranus in the 7th house is not a good sign. That they tend to be very disruptive for the marriage, and of course, with Uranus, decidedly unconventional, as in the case of Naomi's chart here. And for example, if there was a aspect between the ruler of the 7th house, and here we'd have to say that the ruler of the 7th house is, although Uranus is closer to the cusp, if you look at if you look at the Astrodynes, they're very close in power too. So, take your pick. Probably Uranus is the one that you pick. It's the one closest to the cusp. even though Saturn is a little more powerful. But, for example, to see how religion and philosophy affects a marriage, the ruler of the ninth house is in the seventh house. So something about the marriage and partnership has authority over what happens, over public expression of opinion, religious views, and that sort of thing. And then Zane points out that if you're looking at, two charts, two potential, the influence of the sun and the moon, the influence of the sun is very important in a woman's chart because it has to do with her electromagnetic vitality and the relationship that she might have with the father, brothers, partners, assuming they're men partners, and men friends, have a big influence over her, over the vitality part of her electromagnetic energy. And with men, it's the moon. And the electromagnetic energies that are exchanged between he and women, being sisters, mother, friends, or partners, is a critical thing, and Zane writes a lot of interesting things about that. The other thing you look at when you're analyzing a chart is Venus, because Venus rules the affections. And so the harmony of Venus, the aspects it makes, the sign it's in, like for example on her chart, she's got Venus at home in Libra. Fifth house is love affairs and sex. Zane says that the way you look at opportunities to marry in a chart is that in a woman's chart you look at the sun. You take the sun and the sun is first applying to Mars, so that's the first opportunity, is the sun going over Mars, and indicates the kind of partner she'd have. And then the next one would be the sun over Uranus, assuming that the person is of age when these aspects happen. And then he says the moon, you look at the moon in a man's chart and you sort of move it in the chart. So the moon's moving away from the square to the sun here and applying to the square of Mars. But this is her chart. If it was a man's, that's what you look at. And the other interesting thing is you can look at, you guys know about composite charts or how to flip a chart around. For example, if you want to know, you can look at your seventh house and make that the first house. So here's what in general, here's what your partners will look like. Your partners will look like the ruler of the seventh house, planets in the seventh house in particular. And their chart will look very much like the chart, if we made the seventh house their first house, so that this is the first house, the eighth is the second, the ninth is the third house, then the fourth house here. You can, I don't know if you've ever done this or if you're married, it's a very interesting thing to do. So you can see sort of what kind of partner. So if you're delineating somebody's chart, you can give them some idea in general of the fortune of partners that they would tend to attract by pretending that the seventh house is the first house of the partner's chart. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
I think most of you probably already know that. So, he mentions things like dual signs on the seventh cusp, like Sagittarius and Gemini sometimes bring multiple partners. He talks about the importance of physical harmony and looking at the sun, the moon, and the ascendant, and that those signs be somewhat compatible. And he mentions that, interestingly enough, bad combinations are dominant Saturn, dominant Mars. They don't get along at all. Aries and Cancer tend to, cause a lot of friction. Gemini, Capricorn and Gemini, and Leo and Taurus. Those are three bad sign combinations. And then, of course, he goes on to talk about mental harmony and spiritual harmony. Mental harmony, we talked about mentality and that sort of thing. And spiritual harmony, you can't really detect in the chart because you don't know what evolutionary level you're dealing with here. So, and then, just to mention that legal matters are also ruled by the 7th house. Not only partnerships, but when partnerships break up, lawsuits, that kind of thing, divorces, that's all 7th house stuff too. You know, Uranus and Saturn are another one of those really bad combinations, right? Because Uranus is very progressive, very, tends to be unconventional and disruptive, and Saturn is pretty much the opposite of that.
Yeah, and yet
Conservative.
it's in the 1st degree of Sag, which is more open.
So how would we interpret this Uranus conjunct Saturn? Anybody
Tricky.
got any ideas out there? So in general, you'd say that she's going to have that marriage. I would have a hard time how to put those together, but I can do it separately, and I can say that the Saturn means that marriage is going to be work. It's going to be a burden to her. There are, it's the downside sort of thing. And Uranus is going to make it disruptive and unconventional. And so I think you don't really have to put them together, but you can probably say that those two things don't go together very well. And so you wouldn't expect her, that's a tough area of her life.
Well, she lived 101.
Yeah,
So, so basically, obviously she came into her own in the 20s. She was born, in 1920 she would have been 22, so yeah. But she had a very long life, and I think she was very active. She was writing novels in her 80s, 88. She was writing novels still. Incidentally, her novels she was very good at writing were historical, fictional novels. But, yeah, the 12th house, has Jupiter, Neptune, Mars. They all kind of play in there in the 12th house. But she's got this lovely grand trine of the Moon, Venus, and Pluto in air signs. The Moon is trine Jupiter. Yeah. I look at that as quite a positive energy, and I think if you look at Pluto in the positive sense, the universal welfare type planet, and she was, concerned about human rights and the welfare of others. She certainly was a pioneer of the queer in Asia. I think you could call it in a sense.
Did anybody look at, with her, her doing the nursing and everything, does anybody see the sign of Scorpio with a lot of medical professionals?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. That is very true. Scorpio is traditionally, often they're surgeons and
Okay, now what do we have
again,
wrong
I guess
here?
that's the Mars influence.
The Mars. Yeah, for writers.
Oh, yeah.
And that's with the prominent Mercury, and Mercury aspecting Moon or Sun. And she's got that going on. Yeah. Mercury
Are we
conjunct
muted?
Sun is
Maybe we're
another one.
muted.
Yeah,
For writers, and she's got that for writers. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, let me ask a question, Michael, about friends. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a very important house in her chart. With the dominant moon and the grand trine and all that. So I take it she had a lot of friends, and that was a very big part of her life.
Yeah, she had a lot of friends, all, intellectuals type friends, science as well, by the way. Had the children she had, I know this is not children with his friends, but she was certainly had a large circle of friends, intellectuals and very radical friends as well, of the time.
Okay.
Did she have children?
Yes, she had 7 children, although 3 of them died in infancy. see.
Oh.
She had 7 children.
Wow.
I think 2 of them died in infancy, one child died, sort of quite young. But, 4 children, definitely 2 boys, 2 girls, and they became scientists and very clever people. But,
Well, she's got Leo on the cusp of the 5th, which is not a particularly fruitful sign, but the sun is in a fruitful sign, for sure, Scorpio.
oh yeah.
So, you've got that. Usually you look at the sign on the cusp of the house and any planets in the house. So, and you look for a fruitful sign on the cusp. But if, like if Capricorn's there, then...
What about Virgo? Virgo's ruling the house that the fruitful sun is in. Gee,
Well-
what is that, a double intersection? We're all the way into 15 Scorpio before the house ends.
Well, she's born in Scotland, way up
Right,
north.
so,
Yeah, when you live in Mar latitudes, yeah.
right, so if we had a cot,
It distorts the
thing,
Placidian house.
we'd see a huge area of the sky being in 6th house.
But I'm just thinking of how the ruler, Leo is on the 5th house cusp. So then the sun being there in the 6th house and her children are, I don't know at what age, if they died just in infancy, but
Well,
no matter
2
when.
died 2 died. I can find that out for you. I've got that information.
I don't like to think of one sign as ruling death, but I guess Scorpio really does rule many of the aspects around death, so.
Yeah, I would think,
Yeah,
certainly, Renee, I think you could say that the fact that the ruler of the 5th is in the 6th house might,
Scorpio.
the fact that it's in Scorpio means that, she still had 4 children, and she lost 3 in childbirth or however that worked out, but it is square the moon, and being in the 6th house, maybe there's some influence that, the 6th house environment, hospitals or
yeah.
where she worked, science stuff, who knows? She may have been exposed because the 6th house, remember the 6th house is ruled by Virgo. So Virgo is also science. And because science is a lot of Virgo work, mostly. And without all the glamour. And so who knows what she was exposed to even in a combination of when she did the nursing thing or when she was doing the science stuff or whatever. Maybe, I'm making this up as I go, but I'm just following along your train of thought, Renee.
She had, as I say, she had 7 children, 4 sons. 1 died of meningitis when, quite young. Dennis, born 1919, later a professor of bacteriology. Murdoch, born 1922. And another one, which I can't pronounce his name. It's real. Both professors of zoology, so they're all kind of scientists. Their 3 daughters, and 1 died in 1940 shortly after her birth. So, to say, yes, I think the 6th house connection definitely didn't help matters. Like that in Scorpio.
Right. Okay, let's...
infant mortality was a lot more common those days, perhaps, than they are today.
Good
So
point.
you have to take that into account as well.
And I will send, I'll email this out to everybody. So, because it's got a nice little summary. Michael did a little summary of her life. So, we've got to keep looking for charts. People need to, every week we need to, you guys, because I don't have time to do it. You guys need to find charts and that we can look at and that we can use to interpret.
I've got this book which is published in England by a guy, Paul Wright, and it's called Multitude of Lives Chart,
Cool.
with writings about them and everything.
So
So
you-
I can go through the book and I can say, oh, that looks interesting.
Yeah.
You were putting the chart before the person.
No, never do that. Yeah, what I looked at was basically, well, the topic was relationships. So I thought, well, you know, and then when I got to read about her life, I thought, oh, this really was interesting. So that's how I got into it, actually. Basically.
What's your most famous book?
Muted.
Well, a very famous book of hers was called The Corn King and the Spring Queen, which is based kind of on a historical fiction type book, mostly fiction. That was published in 1932, if I remember.
Great, thanks.
And you can still get it today. You can still get it today. The Corn King and the Spring Queen.
By the way, everybody, I should mention that Alice Marie and Michael are now hermeticians.
Congratulations.
Yeah,
Yeah, mutual
and
congratulations.
so and Shane.
Just a little down, guys. Well, I'm trying myself. I'm only on number 7, and it's tough. It's a lot of work,
Yeah,
but I
right.
enjoy it. But nice job, guys. Really nice job.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Thanks for that,
Oh,
Walt.
thank you.
Shane Cook, also, who's on but is not talking, is a recent hermetician. We've had quite a slew of them.
Wow.
So we can now look to Alice Marie and Michael as experts. And actually, they are very, very good.
Yeah.
They are very good, both of them. So, which is nice. So we have a real nice group of people who are very well educated.
That's it, with Mercury conjunct Moon in the 6th.
18 Libra rising. And then the other one is this one. Now, let's look at these two charts for compatibility. I mean, if these two charts came and said, well, we're going to get married or something. You know, one thing I would look at first is I'd look at the distribution. Fire, air, earth, and water, for one thing. I'd count the planets, but I'd also look at the Laura chart is primarily fire and air, and that makes a lot of sense. Well, you've got 1, 2, 3 here, you've got 4 here. So you've got MC, Mars, Uranus, and Neptune in air.
Right.
And then you've got this stellium in Leo, and then you've got, you know, two in earth signs, and one in two in water signs, and then if we look over here at John's chart, yeah, this is a compatibility thing here.
We're looking at the odd couple.
We're looking at the odd couple, and we're seeing,
Oh,
and, you know, compatibility. And here,
I wondered if this was going to come up because one of my favorite astrology books is Lynn Palmer's Astrological Compatibility,
yes.
and how she puts everyone's planets on the outside, and she really always looks at electric and magnetic. So I just
Right, he does have some air, but he's predominantly water.
her book on astrological compatibility.
Tell-
So she puts,
Go ahead.
if she wants to see how John affects Laura, she puts his planets on the outside. Like if you have it's real handy if you have a major progression empty blank chart, and just put all of John's planets where they fall. Let's see, his Uranus is falling in her 11th house of friends,
On my sun.
isn't it? Yeah, coming on top of your sun. So,
Okay, so you put it in the chart wherever, since Uranus in John's chart is at 18 Leo, then you go over and you put it in Laura's chart, it's going to fall like on top of the sun in the 11th house there, right?
Right.
Okay.
So his sort of, maybe his changes affect some of the issues around her friendship.
That's really what I had in mind when I asked Paul if he wanted to look at these two charts, because if you put his Mercury and Moon, both of us have empty 7th houses. So when I sent these two charts in, I said, you know, for 7th house issues, this may look like a non-entity, but if you take his Mercury and Moon and put them on my chart, so his Sun ends up being in my 6th house, and so that would put his Mercury Moon in my 7th house, sextile my Moon. Quite exactly. Pretty exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And our emotional rapport, our sort of intuitive understanding is one of the real strong points that keeps us together. Another feature of the chart is that, see his Venus at 9 Aquarius down there? It's opposite my Venus at 10 Leo. And if
How does that play out?
well, I'm one of those people who isn't convinced that oppositions only mean separating. I think they also mean complementarity, or, you know, an energized polarity.
I agree. Yeah. I've got that same aspect between
I agree.
David and I.
With Venus?
Yeah, our Venuses are
Are
opposite.
opposite.
25 degrees Libra and me, and 25 degrees Aries.
It's always struck me that it's been one of the strongest, you know, features that, I mean, you know, sometimes we fight, and other times it's a strong bonding thing. But I think it's one of the strong features that makes us a couple.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Venus in opposite signs.
Yeah.
Well, they say
And
opposite signs
his-
attract, right?
Yeah, they do, and I don't know why the Church of Light ignores that. You know,
They don't. It doesn't. That's not the same thing as having an opposition in your chart. It's a little different.
Yes,
In this case, it'd be more
exactly.
like
And that's
opposites
why
attract.
why? What are you saying?
The opposite signs. I mean, people have said that for ages.
That opposites
attract.
Right.
But that, so the fact that he has Venus in Aquarius and you have it in
Right.
Leo, that I think it applies there.
I think so too.
It doesn't mean it's discordant at all. They have, for one's a fire sign and one's an air sign.
Right.
Okay, and opposites attract.
Mm-hmm.
That just makes perfect sense to me. That's completely different than having an opposition in your chart.
In your own chart.
Yes, that's a totally different thing.
Oh, that's interesting.
There is a complementary kind of a thing about
Right.
them. You know, they're different in a way that
Right.
is attractive one to the other. you
Right.
know.
The fact that our moons are sextile and his Mercury is conjunct his moon, I think has a harmonizing effect.
What
I'm
you
looking
looking
at his Venus to his Mercury moon. It's
Yeah.
a semi-square,
Yes.
right? So there is an aspect there that's...
Why don't we look at, next time before we move on to the next phase, why don't we look at some more compatibility charts and we'll put them on top of each other, okay? So, and put them up there instead of doing
that
this.
method is called symmetry. It's
Synastry.
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 Composite charts, you take the midpoint between his sun and my sun,
Your
and
sun.
you make a third chart, just a single chart.
Okay.
And I once did that with this relationship, and it was a fascinating
Yeah.
chart.
Okay.
But it's a whole other animal.
Well, let's Brad Pitt and
Angelina, that's a good idea. They had such a strong magnetism, they broke up another relationship in order to get together. And I once saw a Bill Clinton what was his under the desk lover? Monica Lewinsky. You wouldn't have believed the power of those two charts together. No wonder they were irresistible.
We'll do a little bit, this is kind of interesting. We'll do a little of this, more of this next week before we start on the next phase.
His Venus and Mars are in my fifth, right.
So,
And there's a square between, see my, that difficult sort of disharmonious aspect for me, the Mars Uranus at the top of my chart there. And that's square his Mercury moon.
Oh, yeah.
I don't usually look at all the aspects so much as I just love looking at, you know,
The placement.
how he is affecting you and how you are affecting him. I've done it with my husband and I, and it's dead on.
I'd love to hear more about that.
It's very brave to put yourself on the screen.
Yeah.
We wouldn't be bored. Till next time, next week, same time, same place. And we'll carry on a little bit with this, as you know. Okay. Good night, everybody.
Is it possible?
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Good night.
Good night. That was great fun.